If you have Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, or Devon A-Chain in your fantasy leagues, it is officially time to panic. We'll tell you why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also go check her out over at Yahoo. On today's show, we are breaking down the two games on Monday Night Football. And thank goodness we had two games, because that first game, Kate, was pretty awful. We'll talk about Kenneth Walker. We'll talk about the Lions skill players who are also throwing touchdowns on Monday night. But let's start in Miami, because, Kate, this has gotten really dire with the Dolphins. With Tua continuing to be out with a concussion, this Dolphins offense is horrible to watch. They should make criminals watch this game as a punishment. I did it for fun because I'm a sicko. But how concerned are you for Tyreek Hill, Jaylen Waddle, Devon A-Chain in your fantasy leagues, in your dynasty leagues, without Tua?
Here's the thing, Marcus. I think there is a realm of possibility that, Tua comes back this year. The conjecture is that, he's probably going to be ready for, week 8 when he is eligible to return off of IR. Great news. That means, he's feeling good. All reports seem really positive in that regard. But I think what I'm starting to panic is not even specifically about Tua, about this specific concussion, but what is this offense without Tua? I think we're seeing right now more than ever how important Tua was to executing the Mike McDaniel offense. And if he's not there, everything crumbles. It's not like they have some sort of answer without Tua, like we're going to scheme this up and kind of cover the flaws that could be in the passing game with our strength in the run. No, A-Chan been incredibly inefficient on the ground this year. 3.1 yards per carry, just gets stuffed like you would expect a teeny tiny running back to get stuffed when you're loading the box. When they don't have that threat at quarterback, defenses are kind of figuring it out pretty easily here. So my concern, yes, Tua might return and they might fix this in the second half of the season, maybe. But I think we have a bigger question mark of what if it happens again? And what if this offense doesn't have Tua? And, we were already pondering, is he going to retire now? Again, what if it happens again? And we're just kind of left with all these skilled position players and nobody to throw them the ball.
So a couple updates on Tua. I was listening to Adam Schefter of ESPN talk this morning on Sirius XM about Tua, and they said that he's been symptom-free for the last couple of weeks. They believe that if they didn't put him on IR, that he would be ready to go for next week. But the reason they put him on IR was to protect Tua from himself. They didn't want Tua to feel like he had to rush back, right? But they feel like he might have been able to play even last night against the Titans. So that part of it is fantastic news. They said nobody has told him that he can't play. Tua wants to come back. So it does feel like Tua will come back. But the problem is, Kate, and you and I were talking about this pre-show, you look at their schedule coming up, there is a real chance that the Dolphins are 1-5 before Tua is eligible to come back after IR. And you look at the second half of their schedule, and it's an absolute gauntlet, right? Is it worth putting Tua back into the lineup in a lost season if you have no chance of making the playoffs? I think that's what the Dolphins are going to have to decide. But big picture here, right? Big beyond just this season. I think Mike McDaniel is a really good coach. I think he is excellent at designing a rushing attack. I think this offense works with a competent quarterback. but it's not like a Kevin O'Connell offense in Minnesota where you can throw in Josh Dobbs and Nick Mullins, and those guys are going to throw for 400 yards, right? Like they're going to put up big numbers. It's not that kind of passing attack. Last night with Tyler Huntley, who has played in a lot of games in the NFL and has played in playoff games, he had 78 net passing yards in that game. Like they cannot throw the ball without Tua, and that's pretty concerning for Tyreek and Jaylen Waddle moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at Skylar Thompson and Tyler Huntley, and you're saying to yourself, what was the contingency plan supposed to be, right? Tim Boyle, like I think this was like an all-time fumble, but I also think like I don't know. If I'm projecting long term, I have to imagine that the Miami Dolphins are going to be more thoughtful about their backup quarterback moving forward, right? Like,
Can I give you real quick? Can I give you Tim Boyle's college stats?
please do.
In his 3 years in college, he had 1 passing touchdown and 13 interceptions.
That's not great.
Yeah.
I mean,
He was
I
the
don't know
third
what we
string
would have
quarterback
expected.
for the Dolphins.
78 passing yards in week 4. Like,
Yeah.
if I had a Tyreek Hill game with 78 receiving yards, I'd probably disappointed, and that would be assuming that he got every single one of those passing yards. Like, so the question is, long term for let's talk short term. Actually, what are you doing with like if you're a contender right now and you have these Miami Dolphins skill position players? Like, are you
Uh,
holding? What are you doing?
so I have both of them in several dynasty leagues. Jaylen Waddle, I'm just putting on my bench. Like I just can't trust him. He has not been good in the first month of the season. He is going on the bench because he doesn't work without Tua throwing him the ball. So that one's an easy decision for me. I was telling you pre-show, I'm starting Brandon Cooks this week over Jaylen Waddle against the Patriots, and it wasn't all that close. Tyreek's a little harder because I do think Mike McDaniel is going to give him plenty of touches in this offense. And as we saw last night, I mean, Huntley was only like a yard off from completing 2 75-yard touchdowns to Tyreek Hill. He's so good that I want to leave him in my lineup because all he needs is one play to make it worth it. But for Dynasty, if I don't have one of those players, am I actively going out and trying to acquire them now? The answer is no, right? We know both of these receivers are locked up long-term in Miami. Waddle isn't suddenly going to get a bunch of more targets somewhere else. I don't trust this quarterback situation long-term. I'm probably just ignoring Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle for the foreseeable future.
How about Devin Achane, who came out week 1? I was already eating my words about fading Achane, and I was ready to concede that I had made the biggest mistake of my life. But right now, RB6 in Dynasty Fantasy Football Startup, courtesy of dynastyleaguefootball.com. We know the upside, right? But he's a small back. I think we saw like when this offense isn't necessarily able to scheme him a ton of room, he's not the goal line, like a power back that's going to be able to run it up the middle effectively on a consistent basis. Can he break one? Absolutely. Like there's no doubt. Once he gets beyond, that first layer of defense, he can be gone. But he has to make it past that first layer of defense before he can get to the second level. And I don't know. I'm like, I hate to flip flop so much, but this view of the Dolphins offense without Tua has scared me a little bit because we know that this, Achane in particular, already a really volatile player, league winning potential, but also can lose you pretty much any given week because the floor might not be as safe. And we haven't even seen, Raheem Mostert rotate into this offense all that much. Like there's still probably some room for him to come back. Jalen Wright, we've been seeing him look pretty solid in a role. Like I'm trying not to be reactionary, but it feels not great for a guy who's RB6 in Dynasty Startup, which just goes back to the discussion that we had on yesterday's show about I just like I don't want any of these top tier running backs because none of them feel safe anymore.
At least with A-Chain, what I like is he's still getting a lot of touches in this offense. Now, he didn't run particularly well. There was no holes open in this game. Tennessee does have a very good defense. I do want to point that out. Like, they've been awesome in the first month of the season. A-Chain's probably the one that I'm not panicking about because if they can't throw the ball, at least they're going to run the ball. He's going to get touches. They're going to give him screen passes. He's obviously not an RB1 right now, but I do think he's somebody that you leave in as an RB2 as a flex just based on volume.
Very fair. And I mean that is the good thing, right? Like if you give Achan 12 to 15 touches a game, even if they are loading the box, like the odds of him breaking one are better than they are for
Yeah.
most players, just because of that home run hitting speed, that explosive playmaking ability, utilized in the receiving game. All of those things are plus, but I'm probably holding at that price. I'm not going to buy him. I'm not going to trade for him. I'm not probably trading him. Like I think all of these Dolphins right now feel like there's not a lot you can do with them on your dynasty rosters except wait.
All right, Kate, let's talk about Kenneth Walker, who returned in week 4 from an injury. And boy, did he look awesome. Let's talk about his dynasty value next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. You can go bet on, I don't know, maybe this Cowboys-Steelers Sunday night game, my team against Kate's team. Steelers right now, 2.5-point favorites. That line moved, of course, because Micah Parsons isn't going to play. Go bet on who you think is going to have the most passing touchdowns in this game. Which team is going to score the most points in the first half? There's so many awesome bets that you can go and make on FanDuel right now. Again, when you make your first $5 bet, you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed on FanDuel.com. Again, that is FanDuel.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are breaking down the Monday Night Football games. Okay, let's go over the game that actually was fun to watch, the one that had a lot of points scored. Let's talk about Seahawks Lions. I want to start with the Seahawks, where the Seahawks, I thought they looked fantastic on offense. Geno lit it up. Kenneth Walker, though, first game back from injury, 12 carries, 80 yards, 3 touchdowns, also added in 36 receiving yards. He looked like a monster.
He looked like a monster. And let's not forget that this is a Lions defense that nobody is supposed to be able to run against. Like he ate. He absolutely ate. And you know what's funny is ahead of the show we were talking and I said, I love Zach, or I love Kenneth Walker. He looks so amazing. But man, Zach Charbonnet, he looked really good too. And I didn't realize just how few snaps Zach Charbonnet played in the mix, and in terms of like his overall rushing involvement here in this offense, because it felt like he was playing more, and I thought he looked good when he played. But then you see the breakdown of the actual run, like the splits in terms of like who's actually touching the ball. And I gotta say, I'm kind of surprised because I said I wasn't sure how this offense was going to carry it out, but I mean, Kenneth Walker, 13 rush attempts, Zach Charbonnet, 2 rush attempts. Like they were 2 really good rush attempts. Both went for a first down. Both had my jaw on the floor, but I don't think I realized until, looking at the box score, just how dominant Kenneth Walker was when it came to the touches in the run game.
I think I might have been too low on Kenneth Walker in dynasty leagues going into the season. He's only played 2 games, Kate. So again, the sample size is small, but look at the 2 teams he's played. Denver in week 1, right? Denver just allowed Breece Hall to have 4 rushing yards on 10 carries. Like I think Denver's defense is like legit good. And then the Lions in those 2 games, 32 carries for 183 yards, 4 rushing touchdowns, also 42 yards in the receiving game. Kenneth Walker's a stud, and I was concerned that Zach Charbonnet was going to eat into his touches a lot. He's playing. Zach Charbonnet's playing. He looks good, but it's just so clear that Kenneth Walker is Seattle's guy, and they're going to ride him. And I kind of don't see this stopping. Obviously, he's not going to score 3 touchdowns every week, but he looked fantastic, Kate.
No, I think it's more so the usage that you're looking at when it comes to this scenario, right? Like Kenneth Walker, he's been injured, and despite that, came in and handled the bulk of the carries, despite the fact that like Zach Charbonnet actually over the last couple of weeks and into this game has looked pretty decent. Like you could tell, I think over the last couple of weeks, he was getting in more of a rhythm as a runner in general. And so I think for him to step back into this offense after coming off an injury, and for them, I don't know, I was projecting more of like a 50-50 split between Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, and to see them not even utilize that 50-50 split coming off an injury kind of tells me that, okay, yeah, Kenneth Walker is certifiably the guy. RB11 right now in Dynasty Startup ADP. I think, looking at the names in front of him, Devon A. Chan, Travis Etienne, Isaiah Pacheco, like that might be a bargain.
Oh, would if you had Devon A. Chain right now, would you trade him for Kenneth Walker straight up?
Yes.
Yeah. I wouldn't even think about it, right? I also love the direction the Seattle offense is going. This is not a Pete Carroll, we're going to grind it in the ground and limit the number of possessions offense. They still run the ball, right? But you also have
They're gunning for explosive plays under Ryan Grubb.
Yeah. Geno Smith threw the ball 56 times. Can you imagine like how many heart attacks Pete Carroll would have in a single game if they threw the ball 56 times, right? Like this is just a more wide open offense. And it's really benefited Kenneth Walker because you have fewer 8-man boxes that you're running against. I love what I saw from him last night. I also wanted to mention, Kate, to the receivers for you. DK Metcalf, 7 for 104 on 12 targets. Could have had an even bigger game. Detroit, I think, got called for 3 pass interferences against him.
Yeah.
He also had a 2-point conversion, which I thought he pretty clearly scored on that for some reason wasn't challenged. But that's 3 straight games of 100 yards for DK Metcalf. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba, not a huge game, but 12 targets, which is what we want to see. 8 catches for 51 yards. It does seem like he is way more involved in this offense than he was at any point last year.
Yeah, I think we're seeing JSN trend in the right direction. And conversely, I don't think Tyler Lockett looks all that great. No. And obviously he's on the wrong side of 30 at this point, but seeing those two things in conjunction together, the rise, we've seen a decline in Lockett's efficiency, over the past several years. So like, it isn't a huge surprise, obviously, but I do think in general, seeing Lockett's trend down paired with JSN's increased involvement, you have to appreciate that a lot for the former first-round pick. And again, a guy that I just believe so much in terms of the talent. He now has 2 different games this year, 2 of 4 games with 12 or more targets.
Yep.
Obviously, you want to see an increase in terms of like that yards per reception average. You want to see an increase in the efficiency overall. But man, especially if you're in like a full PPR scoring format, that's pretty tantalizing usage.
I want to go back to Metcalf really quickly. I believe it was at the end of the 2019 season in the fall of 2020, DK Metcalf was the number 1 overall player in Dynasty after a fantastic rookie season. He's only 26 years old now. He'll turn 27 in December. He's averaging 9 targets per game this season, averaging 15.3 yards per catch. I still think DK Metcalf is one of the more underrated receivers in Dynasty. You could pretty routinely get him outside of the top 15, top 16 receivers, and he's going to produce like a low-end wide receiver 1 for you. Especially now with this offense just being more open to throwing the ball. I really like DK Metcalf. He's a big value right now.
I mean, I think that's what it is, right? Like the fact that there is such a high receiving volume. For instance, last week, kind of more the or week 4, kind of the more extreme end of things, 63 routes run. But even week 2 against the Patriots, 50 routes run. Like, he had one game all of last year, and that was against the Commanders, which you can throw on the Commanders.
Yep.
He had just one game where he had 50 plus receiving routes run.
Yeah.
This is extremely encouraging usage, and I think finally just giving them the ability to play in an offense that is going to air out the ball more. He's only 26 years old. We know that he's a absolute monster athletically. I am warming up to DK Metcalf, and it's not that like you want to be overreactionary to his start for the season, but I think it's reacting to the offense as a whole and the overall trajectory of this unit and what they want to accomplish on offense under Ryan Grubb that just has me wanting to buy all the Seahawks.
And I also want to mention he's had an incredibly difficult schedule to start the year in terms of matchups, right? Patrick Surtain, Christian Gonzalez, Jalen Ramsey, the first 3 games of the season. And then this one going against Carlton Davis, one of the better corners in the league. He couldn't stop holding him. I believe he had 3 defensive pass interferences in this game. Terrion Arnold was struggling as well. There's going to be some matchups where teams just don't have the horses to stop DK Metcalf. And that's when you could see the 6 for 150 and 2 touchdowns. So he, along with JSN, are both buys in this offense for me. Okay, let's talk about the Detroit Lions, who scored a lot of points. Jared Goff literally didn't have an incompletion on Monday. But are there still players in this offense who are undervalued? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. I absolutely love Gametime. It's the only ticketing app that I use when I want to go see live events. Gametime now has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier than ever before. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats so that you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. One of the things that I love the most about Gametime is that you can get a panoramic view of your seats in your view before you buy. I like sitting in the end zones when it comes to games. So I like to see, okay, what are my seats going to look like? Am I too far up? Am I too far back? It's all helpful on the Gametime app. Plus, they have the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go listen to the new Locked On NFL show with 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. You're going to get some real NFL talk. It's absolutely fantastic. Find Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. All right, Kate, let's talk about this Detroit offense. I mean, everybody played well yesterday. We had Jahmyr Gibbs score 2 touchdowns. David Montgomery scored a touchdown. But are there players in this offense that are undervalued?
I think it's time to just acknowledge David Montgomery in specific. I think there's a really interesting dynamic here when you consider the, difference in terms of dynasty value when it comes to Jahmyr Gibbs. Obviously, Jahmyr Gibbs, 22 years old, so explosive, does everything you would possibly want. He's not going to hold a card to David Montgomery in terms of overall value, 27 years old. But I do think there's some interesting value to be had there when you consider the fact that like David Montgomery is getting, he's getting goal line carries. He is extremely involved in this offense. And right now, Dynasty Startup ADP has him at RB 26. He's got, the rest of this year, obviously, he's got 2025 left on this deal. I think there's, over the next 2 years, going to be plenty of opportunity for David Montgomery to continue to just consistently produce, right? Like there's probably no running back right now that you can get this late in dynasty drafts, in startup drafts, that has a safer floor at the running back position. I think it's all just because of how highly the community regards Jahmyr Gibbs, but
which is
my
understandable, by the way.
takeaway,
Yeah.
I,
So
I want to trade for David Montgomery everywhere.
you just have to know what you're getting, right? When you trade for David Montgomery and you have him on your roster, you know there's a lack of a ceiling there that maybe some of the other running backs possess, right? Like he's just not going to be a top 10 running back. And I think even if Jahmyr Gibbs were to miss some time, I don't know that he's going to get there because he's not that type of receiver, right? He is a between the tackles grinder who could score a bunch of touchdowns, but not going to. I mean, I know he had 40 receiving yards this week, all on a screen, but he's just not going to give you the 5 for 40 weekly that gives you that floor, right? And that's fine because here's what you are getting, Kate. You're getting somebody who is 13th in the NFL in carries right now, 14th in the NFL in rushing yards. And remember, there's some quarterbacks in there that are making up that are higher than that. So it's not only among running backs, 4th in the NFL in rushing touchdowns. That's perfectly fine when you're paying for a non-top 20 RB price, right? You just have to know going in that I'm just looking for a average to slightly above average RB2. And if you can give me that, I'm perfectly happy.
See, I think you're discounting the overall upside of David Montgomery because playing as the complementary back in this offense, he does produce as a top 12 running back, which is kind of crazy. Like you're looking at so far this season, 2 of his 4 games he's finished as a top 12 running back despite playing along with Jahmyr Gibbs and despite the passing game eating too. Like
But
I
I
think
think it's
that
a little
the
bit up
upside
and down though. I think I don't know like the consistency week to week because I do think it's touchdown dependent for him. Where I think other
he
running backs
scored
aren't.
15 plus fantasy points in every single game this season.
Has he scored
I
a
think that's
touchdown yet
pretty
in each
darn
one?
steady. Huh?
Has he scored a touchdown in each game?
Has he? Has he?
I believe he
I
has.
think
Yeah,
so.
he has. So that's my only concern. But again, I agree with your point. Like I think David Montgomery is undervalued. Um, I just don't think if you're trading for him, if you have the idea, hey, he could finish as a top 12 running back, I don't see it unless we get a billion injuries like we did last year.
But you don't need him to perform as a top 12 running back because he's being valued
Yeah,
much, much
exactly.
lower than that. Like
100%. And that's the
that's
point,
the
right? Like
thing. Like he's not your RB1. He might be your RB2 or RB3. And you're gonna get, weekly upside as a potential top 12 back. I think that's more than you could ever want. I think the floor is pretty safe because again, like all things considered, he just gets consistent touches, 11 carries, 12 carries, 23, 17. Like he's had no fewer than 13 touches in any game this season. And I think when you can get that out of a back that you're not paying top tier prices for, and he's in a really good offense, like yeah, I'm all in on David Montgomery.
really quick on Jamison Williams, 2 catches, 2 targets, 80 yards, and a touchdown. I mean, when he's scoring these touchdowns, it's awesome. But Katie, he only has 5 targets over the last 2 weeks. Are you still buying Jamison Williams or no?
Here's the thing. I think Jameson Williams is probably one of the most volatile players that you're going to get. He's like the opposite of a David Montgomery for me.
Yes.
But I think he's got like weekly winning potential. And I'm almost looking at this as like the way that people view Devin Achane, right? Everybody acknowledged there's a lot of volatility there. The ceiling is or the floor is incredibly low on a weekly basis, but he could win you your week. The only difference between Achane and a guy like Jameson Williams is that Jameson Williams isn't valued as a top tier asset. Like you can have Jameson Williams as your third flex play. And, that I think that kind of upside in the flex is pretty valuable overall when you consider the fact he's being valued right now, our wide receiver 43. He's 23 years old. We're seeing, in incredibly efficient campaign. That efficiency might not maintain, but I just like the overall upside of having these guys in my flex. I want all the Lions, all the Seahawks. Give
There
me
you go. This game was
Lions
just
and birds.
Yeah, it was fantastic for fantasy, for dynasty leagues. It was a lot of fun to watch. You know what's also fun to watch? Matt Williamson. He'll be on tomorrow's show. How's about for a segue? To answer your dynasty questions, make sure you send them into us at Marcus_Mosier, at Kate Majuk, at Williamson NFL. Go check out the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. And again, we'll see you right back here tomorrow answering your dynasty questions with Matt Williamson.